The next chapter, that is forms of business organization 2, it basically covers the multiple forms of organizations where the government is involved, where the private sector is involved. Primarily, if you look at it, the business can either be conducted by the private sector organizations or the public sector organizations. So the very first thing that we need to understand, that we need to know, is what is a private sector organization and what is a public sector organization. Then in the public sector organization, we will be looking at the departmental organization. We'll discuss the statutory corporations. We'll also be discussing the concept of the government company. And in the private sector organizations, we are going to talk about something called as MNCs, or the multinational corporations. So this is how this chapter is going to cover the various things. Understand the point. This is a very interesting chapter from the perspective that why government is doing the business. I had heard one of the interview which was conducted in a public forum, wherein Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, one of the topmost trader or investor of our country, this person was asked, have you heard this name, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala? Rakesh Jhunjhunwala is basically a chartered accountant. His character was there, but he's not a scamster. Till now, it has not been declared that he's a scamster. You can call him as Warren Buffett, but Warren Buffett is a different concept altogether. Warren Buffett do the trading based on algorithms. वॉरेन बफे का एक सिंपल सा कंसेप्ट था कि वो अल्गोरिथमिक बेसिस पे इन्वेस्टमेंट करेगा, कि वो एक पर्टिकुलर प्राइस पे शेयर बेचेगा, जब वो शेयर बढ़ जाएगा उसको बेच देगा बिना सोचे समझे, विदाउट एनी काइंड ऑफ इमोशंस. The moment it reaches a particular level, he will sell it, he will buy another share on that day, and this is how he'll keep continuing. That is what is the concept of Warren Buffett. But Rakesh Jhunjhunwala is typically a trader. Originally, he was a trader. He would do intraday trading, he would do weekly trading, monthly trading, kind of that. He would never think of the company. मेरे को मेरा पैसा मिल गया, मैंने बेच दिया, बात खत्म. He would say, वो इंटरव्यू में बताया था उसने, मैंने बीपीसीएल नाम की कंपनी है, 20 रुपए में खरीदी थी, 400 रुपए में बेच दी, मैं खुश हो गया, बात खत्म हो गई. He never had a kind of thought कि ये कंपनी में बहुत दिनों तक के होल्ड करके रखूं. Well, any which ways, this person, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, who is a kind of largest investor of our country, he's basically a chartered accountant. This person said that it's not the business of government to be in business. The government's purpose is basically for the purpose of administration of our country. The government is expected to carry out the activities in the form of services to the society. The government is collecting the taxes from us all, so they should be using that particular tax amount for the purpose of getting the services, getting the infrastructure developed. And that's why he said that it's not the business of government to remain in the business. Then why government started the businesses? When you'll read economics, you'll say ये मास्टर कहाँ घूमता है पता नहीं, पढ़ा OCM रहा है, उसमें राकेश झुनझुनवाला को लेके आता है, फिर इकोनॉमिक्स में चला जाता है, फिर हमको डे टू डे लाइफ पे कुछ सिखाता है. मतलब ये बंदा OCM कब सिखाता है हमको समझ ही नहीं आता है, isn't it? Well, anyways, the point is that in the economic subject, you will be learning the revolution of the industries in our country. When we got free, when we were independent in 1947. After that, our economy was in a very bad situation, in a very traumatic situation. After 1950, when we got our republic done, then after that, the government started planning for revolution. The government started planning for bringing everything back to the normalcy. In fact, they started bringing in the activities. And they were trying to promote it through the private sector, but the private sector, there were capitalists available. Like there were limited business houses. There were these Birlas, the Tatas were there, Modis were there. मोदी मतलब ये नरेंद्र मोदी वाले मोदी नहीं, दूसरे बिजनेस वाले मोदी, के मोदी, बी के मोदी, वो वाले मोदी. So these all people would capture the whole market. This was the earlier conception, and that was the factual situation also. Because they were the only people who were having the money, and they were ready to make everyone else their slaves. The government wanted to bring in the kind of equitable economy. The government wanted to bring in a kind of stable economy wherein all the people would grow. So for that purpose, the government, and what these people were doing, these capitalists were doing, they were trying to have the businesses only in the sectors which have already grown or which were growing. They were avoiding the sector which were required to have a kind of service to the society. They were avoiding the sectors wherein there were the limited profits. So for that purpose, the government was not having an option but to start their own activities into the multiple segments, and that's what the government did by opening the various public sector organizations. Now, there were certain segments wherein you cannot allow the private parties to get in. Like if you take the example of the military segment, army, naval, defense system of our country. You cannot allow the private parties to run the defense system of our country. कल को आपने मुकेश भाई अंबानी को बोल दिया कि आर्मी तुम चलाओगे, then in that case he will be having the maximum army near Antalya. I hope you remember what is Antalya. वो उनका छोटा सा घर, वो नीता अंबानी और मुकेश अंबानी गाना गाते थे पहले मुंबई में, दो दीवाने शहर में, रात में और दोपहर में, आशियाना ढूंढते एक आब नाना ढूंढते. बेचारे घर ढूंढने निकले थे छोटा सा, और फिर वो जो उन्होंने जो छोटा सा घर बनाया ना उन्होंने, that everyone is very much known about. Well, anyways, तो हाँ, प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना में बनाया उन्होंने, बराबर है. हर फ्लोर के लिए उसने प्रधानमंत्री आवास योजना के अंतर्गत फैसिलिटीज ली हुई है. But anyways, the point is that when you are having the businesses being conducted into the public sector, you want to create some kind of monopoly. You want to keep certain businesses exclusive wherein the public is getting affected. For example, railways is the segment which was absolutely a departmental organization. क्योंकि इंडियन रेलवेज का एक अलग से डिपार्टमेंट है. इफ यूड बी नोइंग, very recently, of late, that last 3 years earlier, they have brought the privatization into the railways also. They allowed IRCTC, the Indian Railway Tourism Corporation, Catering and Tourism Corporation. This company has recently taken over the private trains. They started the new concept called as Tejas Express. That is a private train. So the point is what? That this is the segment where the government has kept the exclusivity. Those type of organizations are called as the public sector departmental organizations. For railways, there used to be the separate budget. Yes, of course, railway minister, abhi bhi Piyush Goyal hai railway minister. But since Modi government, part 2, that railway budget has been merged with the union budget. There is no need of having a separate railway budget is what they used to say. Well, anyways, similar to that, the Indian Postal Department, बाद में उसमें भी प्राइवेटाइजेशन हुआ, वहां भी कुरियर सर्विस चालू हो गई. But there also the regulations are there. You cannot permit anything beyond a particular level. Then I've given you the example of military segment where there is a government exclusivity. The railways where there is a government exclusivity. Even in the postage and telegraph, there is a government exclusivity. The kind of services which post department or the telegraph department can provide, no other courier service can provide it. Courier service can only do the transportation of goods and parcels. But the post department provides you the banking services to a certain extent. The postal department gives you the postal tickets. The postal department is allowed to pick up the parcels from one place and transfer it to another place. Telecom department was a separate department for the organization. दूर संचार. आजकल जो ब्रॉडकास्ट मिनिस्ट्री होती है, इंटरनेट सर्विसेज were an exclusive department for the government. BSNL, विदेश संचार निगम लिमिटेड. MTNL, महानगर टेलीकॉम निगम लिमिटेड. BSNL, भारत संचार निगम लिमिटेड. वो बात अलग है कि BSNL मतलब भीतर से नहीं लगता. BSNL है ना, तो भीतर से कैसे लगेगा? भीतर से नहीं लगता. So all these were the kind of departmental organizations, but later on that became the government companies. The MTNL is a government company. BSNL is a government company. VSNL was a government company which is later on sold to Tatas. Then the next part that we are going to, now I'm just trying to bring a kind of preamble in front of you, that what is public sector, what is government company, what is departmental organization, and then we'll go into the further details of these all. I hope I'm going good for everyone. Is it fine? Otherwise तुम बोलोगे मास्टर टाइम पास करवा के चला गया, हमारा हमको पता ही नहीं चला कि हमने आज पढ़ाई क्या की. Well, the next point, अब हुआ यूं कि ओवर द पीरियड ऑफ टाइम गवर्नमेंट को ये पता चला कि प्राइवेट सेक्टर ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस जिनको हम लाइसेंसेस दे रहे हैं कि आप कोई भी बिजनेस चलाना चाहते हो तो यू कैन डू इट, ये लोग सिर्फ जहां पे पैसा मिल रहा है वहां पे ये लोग अपना काम कर रहे हैं, बाकी जगहों पे बिजनेसेस नहीं चला रहे हैं. स्पेशली इनटू द पेट्रोलियम इंडस्ट्री. पेट्रोल अभी अभी रिसेंटली इतना बढ़ गया है, इसलिए लोगों का इंटरेस्ट बन गया है उसमें. Otherwise, I do remember when I filled the petrol for the first time, it was 19 rupees a liter, 19 a liter. मेरे पास लूना हुआ करती थी, वो लूना में हम लोग पेट्रोल फिल करते थे, 1 लीटर पेट्रोल बैठता था 19 rupees, and now it is 91 of course. मैं तो कहता हूँ एक बार का शतक लगा ही दूं, एक बार डायरेक्ट 100-110 रुपया पेट्रोल कर दो और उसके बाद में उसका प्राइस नीचे नीचे लाते जाओ, लोग खुश होंगे. पता है, वो उस दिन पे सिर्फ नाराज हो गए इनकी पेट्रोल 100 रुपया हो गया, 110 रुपया हो गया. और उसके बाद जब वो आज पेट्रोल 50 पैसे नीचे, आज पेट्रोल 2 रुपया नीचे, आज पेट्रोल 1 रुपया नीचे, when this will be the situation, people will be more happy about it. People won't complain about it. People will start saying, oh, well, this is fantastic. Petrol prices are going down. अरे पागल, कहां से डाउन और कहां से अप, इस चीज का लॉजिक बंदे नहीं लगाते हैं. We people have got, seriously, the public has got the limited memory. We live on the short memories, isn't it? तो इसलिए एक बार का वो शतक लगा दो बोलना, और उसके बाद कम करते रहो, लोग खुश होते रहेंगे. They will be seriously happy about the petrol prices going down. Well, the further point, so BPCL, HPCL, Oil India, these kind of companies, SAIL, Steel Authority of India Limited, the why government was requiring these kind of organizations to be formed, because they wanted no monopoly in those segments by the private sector organizations, and at the same time they wanted the services to be given to the public at large. And for that purpose, these kind of organizations were formed by the government in the form of the public sector organizations. Now, these are not the departmental organizations. These organizations are the companies which are being formed separately, which are running their business activities as such. That's why those are called as the government companies. And then comes the statutory corporations. Yesterday only I gave you the dictation on what is statutory corporation. These are the companies which have been incorporated under a specific law. Like there is this law called as GIC Act, the General Insurance Corporation Act. Under the GIC Act, the New India Assurance Company of India Limited is formed. Under the GIC Act, the United Insurance Company of India Limited is incorporated. Why? Because the insurance sector, there were no people available. Last 15 or 20 years, they have privatized this sector also. They have allowed the private parties to come in, but earlier the private parties were not ready to come in into that segment at all. And that's why LIC of India is today the largest insurance company in our country. So that LIC of India, the Life Insurance Corporation of India, is nothing but a kind of statutory corporation, because there is a separate law being formed for that, and that organization is formed under that particular law. If the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India want to make any kind of amendment to its structure, they need to take the permission from the government for that. Government does not mean only the cabinet. Government means parliament. Why they need to take the permission from the parliament? Because there is an amendment in the act required. जैसे अगर आप ऑब्जर्व करोगे कि आपका एक स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ स्टडीज चल रहा है, इस स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ स्टडीज को भी उनको अगर चेंज करना होगा, तो दे विल बी रिक्वायर्ड टू मेक द अमेंडमेंट इन द ICAI एक्ट, और उसके बाद ही वो स्ट्रक्चर को चेंज कर पाएंगे. That's why these organizations are called as the statutory corporations. There is a separate law, there is a separate statute for them. Am I going good for all? And then comes the multinational corporations. कल समृद्धि बिचारी मेरे को 4 बार पूछ ली, सर ये MNCs क्या होते हैं? Are the MNCs same as the public sector organization, etc., etc.? Multinational corporation. The name itself suggests a company which is having the existence and business being carried out at multiple places at the same time, at multiple countries at the same time. That is what we call as the multinational corporations. An organization carrying out the activities, businesses at multiple countries at the same time is what we call as multinational corporations. The multinational corporations have the business being headed at one place and carried out at multiple places. These days, there are so many corporations in our country which have become the multinational corporations. To name a few, if you take the example of Tata Group, if you take the example of Birla Group, Wipro, Infosys, if you take the example of Mahindra Group, if you take the example of Adani Group, if you take the example of Reliance Group, these are Mapro? No. Mapro has not yet started the operations at the other countries. They may be selling their products at the other countries, but selling the products and carrying out the activities, these are two different things. So these all organizations are nothing but what we call as the multinational corporations. I'll just bring the screen in front of you now and we'll start talking about the text. क्योंकि ज्ञान बहुत हो गया, अब पढ़ाई करते हैं. So the very first, if you observe, what we are going to learn is departmental organizations, statutory corporations, government company, and multinational corporations. These are the four major things that we are going to talk about. Of course, their features, their merits, and their demerits. I'll directly come on to the introductory part of it. In India, there is a coexistence of private and public sector. I already clarified what is private sector, what is public sector. Wherever you have the investments from the government, that becomes a public sector. And where the organization is not owned by government, it is owned by the private parties in the country, then in that case, it becomes a private sector organization. The private sector organizations are owned by individual or group of individuals, whereas the public sector organizations are owned by the government. Government does not mean only the central government. It can be state government, it can be union territories, it can be the combination of them. The private sector aims at profit maximization, whereas public sector aims at providing the reliable services to the customers. Expectedly so, but that doesn't happen in that way. In the pre-independence period, public sector undertakings were set up like in areas of post, telegraph, airlines, railways. आजकल Air India को बेचने की बात चल रही है. It's a public sector organization. It is getting privatized. Why? Because government is not able to run that particular organization. After independence, the public sector was undertaken as a part of industrial policy of 1956. You will be referring through this in the economic subject also. Now, what is a public sector organization? Let's focus on that first. A public sector organization is that which are owned, financed, managed, and controlled by government or combination of governments. Owned, financed, managed, or controlled by government or combination of governments. They have given the example of only HPCL and BPCL. There are n number of examples. The Oil India Limited, ONGC, the Oil and Gas Corporation. Then there are so many of those. According to the Britannica Encyclopedia, the definition of it, an undertaking that is owned by the central, state, or local government supplies services or goods at price and is operated on more or less of self-supporting basis is called as a public sector organization, which is not intending to make the profits. The intent of a government departmental organization or a public sector organization is primarily to provide the services to the public, क्योंकि पब्लिक का ही पैसा इनके पास आया है, जो इन्होंने पब्लिक सेक्टर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में, डिपार्टमेंटल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में, स्टैट्यूटरी कॉर्पोरेशन में इन्वेस्ट कर रखा है और उसी के बलबूते पे तो जी रहे हैं. According to Hansen, public sector enterprises means state ownership and operation of industrial, agricultural, and financial and commercial undertaking. Primarily, the commercial undertakings, जहां पे आप फ्री में कोई सर्विस नहीं दे रहे हो, जहां पे आप हर चीज का पैसा चार्ज करते हो. That is what we call as a commercial undertaking. These organizations, now, क्यों ये लोग आए? Because they had the huge capital available. एक बड़ी कंपनी चालू करने के लिए प्राइवेट सेक्टर में पैसा अवेलेबल नहीं था, बट गवर्नमेंट के पास तो बहुत पैसा था. गवर्नमेंट वुड डू द अलोकेशन कि चलो यार एक नया कंपनी स्टार्ट करना है, 500 करोड़ रुपए. कौन से साल की बात कर रहे हैं हम लोग? 1960. 500 crore rupees was a big deal at that time, man. And they were having those funds available, and that's why they could carry on these kind of activities. And that's why the private sector was not able to get into that. But over the period of time, since the time of globalization, liberalization, and what is that? LPG, privatization, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Since that point in time, even the private parties are allowed now to come into the public sector segments. What kind of public sector organizations we have? The departmental organizations, statutory corporations, and government company. I have briefly explained you what these departmental organizations, statutory corporation, or government companies are. The detailed analysis and understanding of this we are going to do in tomorrow's session, that is at 8:20. Please do not forget. Why you people keep on asking this, I don't know, but 8:20 tomorrow morning we'll be discussing the further part of the forms of business organization 2. Am I clear on this?
Bye, sir.
Yeah. Bye-bye.